Top Job. As mentioned in a video during Friendship 2.0, I was not as pleased with this musical as I was with Super Sidekick. There were certain things that it did well, but just overall it was not that good. So today I'm going to act like I know a thing or two about musicals and discuss ways in which this musical could do better. And joining me in this discussion is my little Abby. Because Abby was also a part of Top Job and she really wanted to help talk about the bad parts of this musical, so she's going to help talk about the bad parts of this musical. So, before we dive into the list, here is the plot of Top Job according to Abby Casino.
Top Job. We got our protagonist, Jenna, and she's a tiny child. Well, she was played by a college student, but pretend she's a tiny child. So she's a tiny child, and she goes to school. And teacher tells all the class that it's career day on Monday. So go talk to your parents. And the whole class is like, oh, my dad is awesome. Oh, well, you know what? My mom does stuff that no other mom does, which has some implications, but we're not going to talk about that because it's a child show. But all the kids are talking, and Jenna's pretty quiet, and she's a little embarrassed because she doesn't want to tell them that her dad changes light bulbs for a living. And eventually when she does finally get that out, they all make fun of her. So she gets home, and she gets home to Dad and Teddy. Teddy's her little brother, and Dad is her dad. She comes home, and she's like, all the kids made fun of me because you have a boring job. And the dad's like, my job's not boring. Come to work with me. You'll see how exciting it is. And then she's like, alright, fine. Next day, they go to work, have a whole big crazy trip. There's like 3 songs smooshed into needless, no plot-driven moments. And then they end up with the job, flash forward to Monday, it's career day. And all the other kids now are all getting all quiet. They're like, they don't want to talk about their jobs or their parents' jobs. And Jenna's like, I have things to say for once! And then they talk, and it turns out all the other kids, they thought their parents' jobs were awesome, but they're not. They're really boring, and their parents are kind of mean. And then Jenna gets up on the desk, and she's like, my dad is awesome! Flash back to her and her dad. It's a bit fantasy-esque now, because she's telling it in this pre-mentioned tiny child. But it turns out her dad, plot twist, doesn't just change light bulbs. He changes the light bulb on the top of the Empire State Building. Fancy. Flash back to the classroom, where she's like, isn't that cool? They're all like, yeah, pointless song. Jump back to where her dad is, and she's like, wow, that was really cool. I was gonna lie about your job, but now I don't have to because you're awesome. Because that's a great moral, but I'm sure we'll touch on that later. Flash back to the classroom, everyone's like, yay, Jenna's dad is awesome! And Jenna's like, I learned a lesson, maybe. The end.
Now that you have a general idea of the plot, let's go ahead and dive into the list itself. Now this list is kind of confusing because it's a weird mix of things that I didn't like about the show, and ultimately an overall plot fixing at the end. So it's a little confusing, but rest assured that this is a list. There are 6 things that I'm going to address, and let's dive right in.
Calm down. This musical falls into the same trap that most shows for children do, in that the creators and writers seem to think that since they were performing for littler children, they needed to just bombard you with stuff. And it's exhausting. There's no room for silence. We just go from song to song to scene change to song to scene change to song, scene, with no pauses, really. For an actor, it's extremely frustrating, because you don't have time to stop and breathe, let alone costume changes or acting, really. It's just really frantic and thrown together, and it doesn't need to be. It's the assumption that you just have to distract little children with stuff, when really you can tell a proper story and entertain them, because they're people. They're not some sort of alien creatures, though I have a few friends who would disagree. But I know Jeffrey's talked about Super Sidekick a bunch on this channel, but it's because it's a good show. It's not any longer, or not much longer, it's in about the same time frame as Top Job was. And it had moments to breathe and stop and still tell an interesting story. So it can be done. This show just didn't.
We know, don't lie. Here's the thing about this musical. It doesn't really have a moral. I'll go more into that later, but basically all you need to know is that it really doesn't have a moral. However, if there is one, it is that you shouldn't lie. And the only reason I think this might be immoral is because they beat you over the head with it at the end of the show. There's an exchange in the second to last scene between Jenna and her dad. And it basically goes like this. Jenna says, "Hey, I was going to lie, but now I don't have to. And Dad says, you know, you don't have to lie. And Jenna says, oh, I know. And then she sings a song about how she shouldn't lie. Which is actually a reprise of an earlier song where she was trying to decide whether or not she should lie. I remember when I first read this show, one of the first things that I thought was, why does Dad tell Jenna she shouldn't lie when she literally just said she wasn't going to? To me, though, it seems like the people who wrote this show got to the end of the musical and realized that they didn't have a moral. And so they thought to themselves, oh, we should have a moral because shows like this have morals. So they looked through the musical that they had written, came up with this barely realized one about lying, and just kind of ran with it. And by run with it, I mean hit you over the head with it multiple times at the end, because they're not going to incorporate it anymore into the musical. That'd just be silly. So they bombard you with it in the second to last scene, and then never address it again. Seriously, this musical doesn't have a moral.
Why are all the other parents in the show terrible? A quick note, the show in its original recording has 3 kids, Kyle, Mary, and John. And then they're also double cast as all of each other's parents. And so Mary's is John's mom, and Kyle plays Mary's dad, and John plays Kyle's dad. In our show, we didn't have enough guys to do that, so we switched it to Mary, Kyle, and Jane. And so instead of Kyle having a dad, Kyle has a mom. And I'm going to be referring to it that way. So, in reality, what I just noted doesn't really matter for what we're talking about. It was just some confusing lingo for you. I hope you enjoyed that. Mary's dad is an investment banker. Jane's mom is an astronomer, and Kyle's mom is an actress. And at the beginning of the show, like, oh, our parents' jobs are so cool. But then later you find out they're not so cool. And I can understand that, because, you know, they're trying to contrast it with Jenna's dad's actually being cool, which has its own problems, which I'm sure Jeffrey will talk about. Maybe I'm talking about it. The kids find out after they go to work with their parents that their jobs aren't actually that cool. But it's not just that. They make the parents really awful, and it comes out kind of out of nowhere. There's a moment with Mary and her dad, and he's an investment banker, and he's very much the busy businessman who doesn't have time for family. And he straight up has a line where he says, have my assistant schedule you in for some quality time next Saturday. Kisses, mwah. Our actor, Griffin, who was playing that part, added the kisses line, just to make him that much worse. And it's like, oh, he's a terrible father. He doesn't care about his family. But it has nothing to do with the rest of the show. So that's nice. Even then, we can argue for the point of the show that maybe you can hint at it earlier on with the characters if the show calmed down and gave you time to do that. But in theory, and the actress who we had playing Mary did a really good job of kind of hinting at that. So, fine, one parent, whatever, let it go. But then we have Jane's mom, who's an astronomer. And, again, the point of the song is just to show that their parents' jobs aren't as cool as they originally thought. Fine. Jane is utterly confused. Her mom's doing all this lingo and talking about scientific stuff, and she thought they were just going to be looking at telescopes and finding aliens, and that's not at all the case, and she's really confused and just flustered by it. And the mom's just rambling about nonsensical stuff, and that would be enough. But then out of nowhere, the mom's like, well, pay attention better next time, or else you'll never get into the college of my choice. I mean, your choice. 1, the kids are like 8. 2, where did that come from? When did the mom become a controlling perfectionist pushing things on her daughter? It's never hinted at before. The job could have been confusing and not a cool job, as a catchy song then tells us, without her being terrible. So then you might argue, fine, they're making all the parents terrible to contrast more with Jenna's dad and show him how awesome he is. But then they have the actress, and she's fine. The job is boring. What the kid Kyle realizes is that filming, it takes a really long time. It's tedious. You have to take lots of takes. She's in a commercial. It's for some nose spray, so it's not a super glamorous job. But she talks, and she's like, you know, I didn't always do this. I used to do Shakespeare. Doing this for the money because I need to raise kids, and it could turn into, well, yeah, it's because of you. I had to give up my dream. But she doesn't do that. She goes, but I wouldn't have it any other way. She's like, I picked this. I love you. So she's a fine parent. And so then there's this confusing, why did you make 2 of them awful and then 1 of them okay? Could it be that in the musical, the actor is the only one portrayed as a good person? I have suspicions. Either way, I feel like they were almost trying to do something and then didn't, and it's just confusing and a mess, and then we don't even stop to discuss it. The show just keeps going. So it winds up being entirely pointless.
Write better songs. I'm going to preface this by saying that I am not a writer of music. But I like to think that I have a certain degree of understanding when it comes to songs in musicals. You see, songs in musicals need to have a purpose. You can't just have songs for the purpose of having songs. Well, you can, it just leads to not a good musical. The majority of these songs seem to exist purely because this is a musical, and that's the only reason. So, to understand where I'm coming from, I am going to give a quick rundown of each song and offer what it does or does not offer to the musical. And I'm not going to do exactly the same format as Singing Guy does with his project, or when I talked about the songs from Super Sidekick, because this video is already going to be really super long, so I'm not going to actually have any snippets from the song itself. So, I hope you're okay with that. What a cool job! Jenna and her classmates sing this song all about how the classmates' parents have cool jobs and Jenna's dad doesn't. And that way it does serve a purpose. It allows us to kind of sort of introduce the conflict, and it does kind of sort of move the plot forward. And it allows us to see that Jenna does get made fun of for her dad's job, so I guess this one gets a pass. Did you ever wonder? Dad sings this one, and it could have more of a purpose if the show actually had a moral. I'll get to that later, but at the moment what I get from this song with this version of the musical is Dad basically saying, all these people work, but you know what? So do I. So, not really adding anything to the show, except Dad emphasizing the fact that he does in fact work. I shouldn't lie. This is Jenna basically trying to convince herself that she should lie. I realize that the title of the song might be a bit misleading, but the song is basically her asking herself why she shouldn't lie. Honestly, this is probably one of the stronger songs. Jenna wrestling with herself trying to decide whether or not she should lie may have worked better if the writers had done anything with it. But they didn't. So, ultimately, this song doesn't do very well with this musical. And I'll go ahead and mention the reprise as well, because this is the closest the musical gets to actually having a point by bringing back this song and saying, look, Jenna learned something, except that she didn't really, so yeah, it doesn't really do anything either. Faux Diddle Doe. This song is sung by Jenna, Teddy, and Dad. Basically, they're waiting for a bus, and this is the song that they sing to pass the time. It's mostly pointless, but if this song does anything, it allows us to see just how good a dad the dad is. It shows that Dad is willing to do pretty much anything, even make a fool of himself in public, to keep his kids happy. If that's what the writers were going for, then they did an excellent job. But since this show is so jumbled and doesn't seem to have a moral, I can't say for sure. So, ultimately, this song really does just seem to be filler. Many Friendly People. This is also a stronger piece and would have worked really well in a different musical. You see, this song has Jenna, Teddy, and Dad traversing through New York City on their way to Dad's job. Along the way, they meet many friendly people and hear about different jobs. So we hear about a bus driver and a train conductor, and we hear, although these jobs may not be particularly glamorous, they're still enjoyable to the people who do them. If the show focused on that idea, this song would work really well. But it doesn't. So this song basically does nothing. Not a cool job. Jenna's classmates return as we find out that their parents actually don't have as cool a jobs as they had originally thought. And that's pretty much it. But it does move the show along, so this one gets a pass too. Tippy Tippy Top. This contributes pretty much nothing. It starts with Jenna bragging about her dad, which works well enough, I suppose, but then the other kids join in, and then the teacher joins in, and then there's a moment in the song where they say, I kid you not, he'll change the bulb or come down, plop. And keep in mind, this is after they talked about how he's thousands of feet in the air, and they say it so happily, and it just makes me really uncomfortable. And the plot, however much there is one, grinds to a complete halt for the song, so yeah, fail. Watch It Shimmer. This does nothing. At all. And it's the last song in the musical. Again, I'm not an expert at this kind of thing, but I can't help but think that the last song in the musical should help remind you of the show that you just watched. Take, for example, Super Sidekick. Yep, we're bringing that back in this video again. In Super Sidekick, the last song is the finale, where we have the melody from Blackjack, the first song in the musical, with the addition of Inky as Inky joins Blackjack in his crime fighting. So we're reminded of that first piece, but we're also reminded that Inky is joining Blackjack in his crime fighting, and it reminds us of the journey he went through to get to this point. This song, it tells us about the light bulb. Yep, that's it. Oh, sure, they say top job over and over and over again, and they kind of sort of mention Dad, but it's pretty much just about the light bulb. It even goes so far as to say that it's not the moon or the sun that lights this world. No, it's that one light bulb on top of that one building. And it's just so peppy and so ridiculously over the top from the moment it starts. I mean, just listen to it. So yeah, I like the ending. Which means that really, only 2 of the songs get a full-blown pass for this version of the musical. That's a winner.
Change Dad's job. When I first read the synopsis for the show, when all of us, me and my friends, were first cast in Treehouse Troupe, I got really excited because I thought it was going to be about legitimately this guy who works like as a janitor, because all it says is that he changes light bulbs and Jenna's embarrassed. And I'm like, oh, that's not a glamorous job. And they're going to show it in this really nice light, and this kid's going to realize that it doesn't have to be spectacular, and that's not what's important. And I don't know what she's going to learn, but she's going to learn something great. And then we come to the musical, and she's terrified. It's good. She's terrified, and she's going to lie about it. And Jeffrey's touching on this a bunch about how there's multiple random songs about not lying. So I'm not going to get into the problems with that, but she's really tempted to lie to make her dad sound cool. But then she finds out her dad actually has a cool job. He changes the light bulb on the top of the Empire State Building. And so it becomes, oh, I don't have to lie, because it's actually cool. What? So if he was actually a janitor, would she have lied about it? They don't touch on any of that. And then we have the other kids with their parents' jobs who aren't as cool, and then suddenly they seem less important now because of it. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you love doing it. And, you take care of the people you love. Like, that's what it could have been. Because the dad's really cool, and he almost pushes that. He talks a lot about, I like my job, that's all that matters. And he's like, hey, we don't judge other people's jobs. And he's doing that a lot, but the show's so rushed, and it just completely passes over it. That was the thing that bothered me the most about reading the script, is I thought it was going to be something really important. Like for kids who don't come from a lot of money, and don't come from the best, say, family situations. Because you look at the show, and Dad, he's got a blue-collar job, he's raising 2 kids, and there's no mom ever in the picture. It's just, so it's like a single dad, and if you had him in a quote-unquote lame job, but still trying real hard for his kids, I think that could be beautiful. But they don't, because hey, it's fine, because his job's actually really cool. And that's what's important. As long as your dad actually has a cool job, then you don't have to lie about it. Jeffrey's going to touch on this a lot more, but a lot of the show is, oh, Jenna, don't lie, and they seem to push it for no apparent reason. But you come to realize that if he didn't actually have a cool job, if they had changed his job, and you have this really meaningful story about family and it not mattering, with Jenna, the character she is, she wouldn't have learned something. She probably would have lied anyway. The only reason she doesn't is because Dad actually has this cool job, so she doesn't have to. And you realize that the dad has to keep constantly reminding her not to lie, because she doesn't actually learn anything. And neither do any of us.
Have an actual moral. This show is so jumbled. I mean, holy cow. It's almost like the people writing the show didn't know what kind of a show they wanted to write. Did they want there to be a moral? Did they want it to be just a completely ridiculous show? Did they want it to be something in between? I don't know. And neither did they. And honestly, this isn't just a theory. The jumbled nature of this musical comes forth in the vast differences between the script, the libretto, and the demo CD that they sent us. Now, it's not unusual for there to be minor differences between these things, especially with a new musical, which Top Job is. But these are not minor differences. These are major differences. There's a verse flat out cut from I Shouldn't Lie in the CD that's in the script and the libretto. Many of the songs are written in completely different keys. And I think probably the best example of this cluster mess is Faux Diddle Do, which is just completely wrong over all the mediums. I mean, they're all just so different, and I don't know which one is right, so I just have to assume that they're all wrong. And the best part is that the script actually has the gall to say that it follows what it said in the rehearsal CD, which is just wildly untrue. Now, we had to do what the instrumental did because that's what we had in terms of what we could sing to. So that means that for this song, we had to throw the script and the libretto completely out the window. So what I'm going to attempt to do now is create an actual plot that makes sense and hopefully will lead to a less jumbled version of this musical. Imagine, if you will, a better musical. We open on pretty much the same scene. The kids sing about how great their parents' jobs are. Jenna is hesitant. She reveals the one thing she knows about her dad's job. He changes light bulbs. The kids make fun of her. She's upset. There you go. She lets her father know about all this, and he suggests that they come to work with him so she can make her own judgments. Did You Ever Wonder stays pretty much the same, but the focus changes. Instead of spending so much time on Dad insisting the fact that he does work, darn it, we focus more on the three groups that he mentions in the song. So we hear about the gardeners of Central Park, and we hear about the people who hang the artwork in the Met Museum, and we hear about the people who decorate and set up the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center. All these jobs that don't sound glamorous, but are extremely important to the people of New York City. This idea continues as we go into the city and actually meet people with boring-sounding jobs. So we hear about the bus driver, and we hear about the train conductor. And once again, many friendly people now make sense to the plot of the musical. And throughout this entire thing, we also see just how good of a dad the dad is. But since this is something that the original musical does well, I'm not going to address that anymore here. We finally get to his job and we find out that it's not something ridiculously over the top or quote-unquote cool. He's just a janitor at a hospital. Jenna is upset by this because she expected her dad to have a cooler job, and she considers lying to her classmates about what her dad does. But then she sees her dad actually working. She saw how her dad is proud of what he does, and she sees the interactions with the patients. And she also finds out that these interactions with her father is some of the things that these patients look forward to the most. And not just because he mops the floors and changes the light bulbs and does other things that janitors do, but because he is just a legitimately nice person who likes to talk to people. She soon realizes that although her dad may not have the coolest sounding job, it's still cool. And it's not because it's a big, over-the-top, cool-sounding job, but it's because he's proud of what he does, and it's because it allows him to affect people who need to be affected by kindness. We then go back to the classroom where we hear about the other parents' jobs. Now, personally, I don't think the other parents need to be terrible. We can just have the jobs be not cool without having to turn the parents into terrible people. But if you are going to have the parents be terrible, make all of them terrible, not just two of them. That way we can contrast the way these parents with cool-sounding jobs treats their kids with the way that the dad with the not-so-cool-sounding job treats his kids. And that way, the parents being terrible has an actual point. When Jenna reveals what her dad does, the other kids make fun of her. And Jenna defends her dad, and maybe the kids learn the truth, or maybe they don't. It is less important that the other classmates get the point as long as Jenna does. And that point is that as long as her dad is affecting a small group of people, and as long as he is proud of what he does, he has a cool job. Even if others may not think so. With these changes, most of the problems that have been discussed in this video can be fixed. The change doesn't do much for the pacing. The pacing just has to be fixed and make sure that the person who's writing it doesn't rush anything. Lying, while still addressed in the musical, isn't focused on as much. I think in this particular version we can still keep the two I shouldn't lies, but still address the idea throughout the musical more than just those two times. And again, not as the main focus or the main moral, so that you don't have to be beat over the head with it at the end of the show. The parents' terribleness, then, makes sense. Or doesn't exist, depending on which version you go with. The music will then make more sense because the songs fit better with this new moral than the Rush Don't Lie one. And Dad's job gives us a meaning and a moral that isn't rushed. Not to mention the fact that this moral is in the musical. I mean, it's not addressed, really, but it's obvious that that moral could exist. not only does he kind of sort of sing a song about it, but he is constantly spouting beatitudes about how people should look at jobs, as was mentioned earlier in this video. But the writers just did nothing with it. So there it is. A better musical. Someone who can actually write these things should probably get on it, because, honestly, the potential for a good musical is there. We just need to act on it.